Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel Testing Many Bytes. I'm your friend Amun Shaktivel, and in this video we're gonna see about the another testable called as Stub. In the previous video, we have learned about mock, and we also learned about what is a testable. If you haven't watched that video, I highly recommend you to watch the previous videos before watching this, so that you could understand what is happening here. All right. And again, so we have learned mock is basically an it's a nullified version of a class, and it doesn't really play any sort of role in a test. Now, coming back to Stub is also a testable, and the only difference here is Stub is basically a combination of your nullified class instance, and then you could add some hard-coded method implementation. For example, if there is a method called as get salary, and then there is a class called a student, you could Stub is basically telling the student class get salary method to return 10,000 rupees as the salary. So that's the Stub, right? We're going to understand with a very good example, not a student example, real-time example with the help of our response as a class that we have discussed in the previous video, right? Without wasting a lot of time, let's go to the IntelliJ. And now in the previous video, we have learned about what is marking. And now I'm going to cover what is, we're gonna follow the same format. First, we're gonna understand how we can do this without a Mockito framework, and then we will understand how we could do this with Mockito framework, right? So let's go to the response as a class. We have written the unit test for this, but let's say I want to return a unit test for this particular method that I have written. The method here basically calls, accepts some status code, and it checks whether this is matching the status code that's coming from the response itself. So that's what it is. Let's go here and write a unit test for this. So let's go here and say test a void status code. I want to assert status code method, and here so let's say I want to assert it. So response assert dot assert that. Now I want a response, right? So the first thing that we could do is, in the last video, we have created a class called as a response mark, and we simply implemented the response interface from the IO rest assured dot response, right? We implemented all the methods, but we didn't provide any sort of implementation. So the class is basically a nullified version, which means it will have all the default values. If it's a string, it's a null. If it has an object, it becomes null. If it has a boolean, it is false. If it's an integer, it returns 0. So now this is a mark, right? Let's use the mark. So as we know, Stub is basically a combination of mark plus certain method implementation, right? Hard coded. That's what it is. So now, so what I'm going to do is new response mark, right? And then this gonna give me a response object. Let's use a response reference here. And now what I'm going to do is, if I need to call this assert that, I need a response mark. So I will pass this. Now I want to test whether the status code is, and I say it is 200. Okay. And then I will call the assert all method that will basically make all the assertion, because if you go and look at the implementation, I'm using soft assertion, so that if somebody is writing a fluent assertion for all this, at the end they have to call the assert all method, so that I will call the assert all from the assert j, so it can make the assertions itself. So now I go here and see, now the test will obviously fail, but let's understand why it fails. Let's first check whether it is actually failing. That's a good way to start writing your test, to make it actually fail, and then you provide the implementation. So now the test fails because it is expecting the status code to be 200, but it was 0. So our implementation is actually working, and let's go and make this test as pass. So now if you go to this response mark, there is a method called as status code, which we are calling, right? So there is get status code, right? So we could use 200 here. And if you go here, and let's try to run the test. So now we have hard coded the response for the get status code, right? And that's what stubbing is. Now it says, hey, expected is 200, but was still 0. Why is that? So because let's go to the implementation and see what we have done. So let's go to the assert that. So you notice we are calling status code method. So there are multiple methods: get status code, status code. So I got confused. So I'll go ahead and do both of these, right? Or in our case, we can just return this to 0, and let's try to go and run the test. So it rest assured have multiple methods to get the status code. So it's just a different methods. So now the test got passed. So what we have done here is we have used a mock which has nullified the class instance, and then what I did was I asked it to basically return 200. I hard coded the value 200 here, so that whenever it is called, it returns 200 and my test got passed. So now this is without Mockito library. Now let's do it with Mockito. So what you have to do is simply call Mockito.mock, and then I say response.class. You don't need the need for the creating new class and all that, right? It will take care of it automatically. So once you have this, I want to tell once the status code method is called, so I need, now I have created the implementation, so nullified implementation. Now I need to tell when somebody is calling you, so there is a method called as when that is coming from Mockito. When somebody is making a call, okay, to the status code method, then return 200. So this is the nullified implementation, and I'm overriding just one method implementation. So hard-coded method implementation. This is using Mockito, right? Implementation, right? So that's all. So now let's try to run the same test, and this should pass. So this is how you could write unit tests for this particular method. Good. So this also got passed. So now you have understand. So Stub is basically a mock plus certain method implementation with hard-coded value, and we have hard-coded that using when you call this particular method, and then you return this. But one important thing that you need to understand here is, let's say I create response mock without Mockito, and then let's say this is new response mock. This is a class that I have previously created. Now I go to this class and go to the status code implementation, and let's say 0. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this, right? Instead of using the ones that I created, let's say if I use this. Okay, now this won't complain here. So that response, right? Now let's say, let me try to run it, and this will save. If anyone can guess the reason why, I think you are too good. So now it says, hey, missing method invocation call. So let's say you are trying to call this method, then use when mock.get articles, then return articles. So the problem here is Mockito. So the important thing that you can understand is Mockito can stub method calls for the mock objects it created. Okay, so in this case, the mock object that we are using here is basically not created by Mockito itself. It was created by yourself, right? You created a, this particular class, and Mockito doesn't control any of those methods. So that's why when you call this, it doesn't know what to do with it, and it failed. So that's the reason. What I'm saying is, whenever you are trying to use stubbing using Mockito, okay, don't use like this, rather use like this. And this time, the object that you are creating here, the mock object, is created using Mockito. So Mockito has the control to to basically change the return value of this particular method call. And this is how you could use stubbing to write unit tests for your automation test. Again, going forward, we'll also understand how we could write unit tests for a developer's code. And this whole playlist is going to be as interesting as this, like this. And I need your support. So please share it with your friends if you find this useful. I'll see you guys in another great video. Until then, tada, bye bye from Mohammed. See you guys. Bye bye.